that'll get it. We're right at the top of the hour, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started here. So I appreciate y'all submitting questions. I just never know if you guys want to do more of these live videos or more of these Edelbrock carburetor things. I want to give you the information that you want and need. So for me, getting feedback's always cool. So I definitely appreciate that. Um, let's see here. I guess we're just gonna just kind of jump right into some questions that I already got, and we'll just kind of roll through those. Um, since stuck in my garage, I know you're there. I'm going to answer your questions that you had first, because you had a couple of really good ones and ones that I really haven't talked about that much in any of the videos, I guess. So one of your questions was, is it possible that one fuel air mixture screw can have more effect than the other? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. Um, when you look at when you look at these mixture screws, pull one out real quick here. When you look at these, when you set these, you're supposed to set them in tandem. You know, if you're a turn and a half out on the driver's side, you're a turn and a half out on the passenger side. It's supposed to equal things out, and that's not a bad way of doing it. Um, you know, you have to kind of go by a little bit what the AFR is telling you, or by how it smooths out, or if you're tuning with an old school vacuum gauge, that's one way of doing it. One thing that could get those off, and I've seen this over and over and over again. These things, these idle mixture screws aren't magic. You know, yeah, you're gonna set these, but it's not an adjustment that you keep coming back to. I've seen a lot of times where these are over tightened, and if you can pull these out, it doesn't matter which one it is, but you know they're not left right specific. But if you can run your thumbnail over this, like this one has just a slight little ridge on it. It's where someone has run these down too tight and seated too tight up against the port there, and it will, if you do that enough, it will cause a little bit of damage to the mixture screw. Now, typically it'll hit the aluminum down in there and ruin it much quicker. But I've seen that quite a few times where these have just a little bit of a ridge on it, and it's from the over tightening. Now, if you get one that has a ridge on it and one that doesn't, well, that could be your a little bit of what you're maybe experiencing as far as the differences in it. So, if that is part of your question, hopefully that answers it. But again, you know, the easiest thing in these all the time is if you're experiencing a little bit of a rough idle, you can't get these to adjust out that well. Like this one's about perfect. You can't really feel anything on that one, so I'm assuming that this one's good. Again, this one has just a slight one, but I don't know if you're going to notice that too much in a, you know, in a normal tuning situation. I suppose you could, but for the most part, that's about right. If you've got garbage in there, that's always a really, really quick, down and dirty, easy, you know, way of doing it. Shoot some carburetor cleaner down through there. Sometimes it'll free up some blockage, but you know, the best way of doing that, you know, obviously is if you pull the top off that carburetor and you've got any amount of crap down in there, it's going to get into the idle circuit, no doubt. It's what feeds it. It's where the fuel comes for it. So, you know, if you pop the top off this thing and you know some black, you know, sludge or, you know, typically it's more, you know, little pieces of stuff that I've seen in those. It's typically from stuff that's come from the fuel tank. It's gotten past your filters, whatever. Um, I guess I should have made mention of this at the beginning, and I'm going to keep doing it over and over again because I can't tell you, and I'm not even going to put a percentage on it, but most of the time when people have something that is jacked up with the carburetor, I can almost always 100% of the time go back to a couple of pieces in the fuel system here. And I know I've talked about this over and over and over again, and I'm going to keep doing it because honestly, most of the carburetor issues that I see are in this fuel system right here. If you do not have a good stainless 100 micron fuel filter between the tank and the pump, and a good paper element 10 micron filter here that are in good working order. And when I mean that, you changed them out. And anytime you do, a little bit of any type of service to the carburetor, fuel system, you're get do some tuning or whatever, couple of months down the road, whatever, depends on how much you drive it and the type of fuel that you're running through your system. You have got to service those fuel filters. If you do not, you are going to cause issues within this fuel system. So it is imperative that you monitor those filters. Now, Tool Junkie, I appreciate you being on. Asked if there's a brand that I go by. Hang on, let me see if I've got one. Yep, I do. So I will always use Aeromotive fuel filters. Now, don't ask me why. I'm not going to tell you that the other brands on the market are junk. They're not. There's some really, really good ones. I guess probably the biggest reason why I use Aeromotive fuel filters, and this is a 10 micron fuel filter, and it's a rather large one, but it's for an EFI setup. The reason why I use Aeromotive is because one, well, it's no secret. I think I've made mention on here before that I used to live in Kansas City. These guys were very close to me. I spent a lot of time over there over the years. Got to know them very well, got to know the product very well. The Aeromotive stuff for me, I've seen less drop in fuel pressure at the carburetor when using the Aeromotive filters. Now, if you go by their little tech tip, I guess, when it comes to fuel filters, is you always want to push fuel, suck through stainless, push through paper is their deal. Meaning you want to suck the fuel from the pump through this filter in a stainless element. Less drop, it's a better filtration, and at 100 micron, you get the best setup there. When you push the fuel, the pump is pushing it through this filter, and when you push it through paper, again, you get a little bit better consistency with filtration, and more importantly, with the pressure drop. That's the biggest part of it, is you will see a little bit of a pressure drop because when you put a restriction in here behind it or in front of it, you will notice some of that stuff. So the regulator is the key component to this setup. The filters are a serviceable item. The regulator is where you have your adjustability at. And a lot of people, tons and tons of people, I get it. If you read any of the comments in the Ultimate Tuning Guide, in any of my carburetor videos, the live rebuild that I did, any of those, you'll read through the comments, and I try to answer every one of them. And it's one of the first things I ask when people say, I've got this happening, I've got this at wide open throttle, I've got this at off idle, whatever. My first question is almost always, what's your pressure regulator at? Well, I don't have one. It's a stock pump. It doesn't matter if it's a stock AC Delco pump off the shelf. I've seen it a dozen times, a year where, you'll have one that's supposed to be for a stock, pressure, and it does not give you that. There's too many inaccuracies in a stock AC Delco pump. And even with if you have a pressure, an electronic fuel pump, whether it's frame mounted or in the tank, tank's always the best. There's too many inaccuracies. And even if you buy a pump that's set at 6 psi, this won't put out any more than 7 psi of pressure. It's set at 6 pounds. You still have to have that regulator. And I know folks get tired of me talking about this a little bit, but I'm going to hammer on it over and over again because none of the things that you do tuning wise matter if anything here is jacked up. Filters are the most important, but you have to have that pressure regulator in there. Again, I'm always going to go back to the Aeromotive stuff because it's my favorite. It's the one I've gotten used to. It's not that the Holly brand ones or Proform or Quick Fuel or any of those others on the market are bad. It's just that I've gotten more better results with the Aeromotive stuff. It's made in the U.S. Some of them are rebuildable. Some of the Holly ones are rebuildable. A lot of the Holly stuff is offshore now, which is just a sad state of where we're at. People don't want to pay for a really good regulator because why would you spend $100 on a fuel pressure regulator when you can buy a $30 one from the cheap guys offshore? It just happens to be one of those things. So I'll try not to rail on that too much, but I'm a big made in the USA type of guy. I work for an American manufacturer, and obviously I'm a little sensitive to it, I guess. But you're going to get better quality when the quality control is more controlled every step of the process. So anyway, I'm going to keep coming back to this. So I don't think that it's to badger you, but I'm going to let you in on another little secret here. Most of the carburetor problems that I fix are very, very little related to a calibration kit or tuning or anything that. It's almost always done here at this fuel setup. You get the fuel system right, and here's the funny thing about it: it's universal. I don't care if you're talking carburetor, port injected fuel injection, or throttle body fuel injection. If you get the fuel system right, you will almost always get whatever you're working on right. So anyway, I'm gonna stop talking about that. But anyway, good question, and I just wanted to keep coming back to it because if you get the little things right, the big things will take care of themselves pretty easily. So it's a good question. On the AVS2, is there an adjustable air bleed in the idle circuit? Um, if I understand your question correctly, no, there's not. But it leads into another question here that I'm going to get into in just a quick second. So hang on to that real quickly. But hopefully, on the air mixture side of things, that answered your question. And it's a good one because, again, it's another little point that you need to look at. Edelbrock does sell these separately. And again, a lot of times, if you call them up, their customer service department tell you got a damaged one or a bad one. I don't know how they do that, but I've seen them do it over and over. And then give me an address, I'll just send you a pair of them, and you'll get the springs and the screws. If you got a U.S. address, again, I've just seen them do it way too many times over the past. So I don't know how they make money on it, but anyway, they do usually a really good job. And I think if you buy these, they're not that much money. They're 10, $15 or something like that. I don't think they've got them in a kit as a part number, but I'll have to look at that and see. But anyway, hope that answered your question on the mixture screws. Another one from that stuck in my garage left me in the comments there was ethanol. This is a really, really good question because it's hard to find any, and I hope the birds in the background aren't making too much noise. If they are, I'll shut the garage door. But hot as blazes here in Memphis today. It's about 85, so it's not too bad heat wise, but humidity's pretty ugly. So something to deal with living here in the mid South. Anyway, back to ethanol. It is really hard to find any pump gas out there that does not have ethanol in it. Almost all of it from the pump is E10, which is 10% of ethanol. Now, I did a video on measuring ethanol in fuel. It's very, very inexpensive. There, all right. Taking the toolbox here. And yep, man, it's almost like I planned this. You can test the ethanol in the fuel with something very, very simple with a little bit of fuel and a little bit of water. Put the right amount of fuel in there, put the right amount of water in there, agitate it up, let it settle, and it will tell you what your percentage of ethanol is. It is a very, very cheap, inexpensive way to do that. Now, I don't do this very often, to be honest with you. But I will do it when I am troubleshooting something because if I know what the fuel is mixture that's in there, I know where to go with on the tuning side. Now, ethanol at 10% ethanol, you can run these carburetors and typically not run into any issue. You'll see some guys on the internet that will have ethanol proofing kits or carburetors that they'll sell you, it's not that they're changing any of the coating that's in the carburetor here. They should, but it doesn't. There is a coating you can put in there that is resistant to the corrosive nature of ethanol that destroys these aluminum carburetors and the pot metal stuff that Holly has and some of the others on the market. But most of the time, what they are doing is they are changing the jetting and the rods about 10% more, 10 to 15% more, because you need that to. Ethanol requires more fuel to make more power, and it requires more ethanol to get that. So a lot of times they'll change the rubber seals in here. If you got fuel system, if you use PTFE rated line, any auto parts store, you typically have that in the gates. If you do aftermarket stuff, I'm a big fan of Frigola. They do have a fuel line that is PTFE rated, and it just means that the ethanol won't destroy it as quickly. Ethanol's caustic, it's nasty. As far as E85 goes, and I think that was more specific to what Stuck in My Garage was asking, is if you can use E85 in these carburetors. And the answer to that is yes, you can. You do need to pump up a little bit more of the rod and jet. You need to put more fuel through it. It's just the amount of time you can run ethanol through these. Put that ethanol vial back. It's the amount of time that you can do that with. You cannot do that for very long in these carburetors. E85 is a super highly concentrated mix of ethanol, and again, it is highly caustic. Ethanol fuel is not mixed at the blender or at the time when gasoline is made. Ethanol is added by the distributor right before it goes into the trucks to goes out to the marketplace, because ethanol cannot sit in gasoline very long. One, it attracts a lot of debris and it attracts a lot of water. It's part of the problem with ethanol based fuels is it just adds more crap to the fuel very quickly. So they will mix the fuel at the point of it going into the trucks that send the fuel out to everybody. So because it's so caustic in nature, it destroys everything at the blender as well. So ethanol has to be taken care of very carefully. And if the carburetor is not made to handle the E85 fuel, it will literally eat these apart. I don't have. Oh, I don't think I think I got rid of that carburetor, and I probably should. Next time I get a really damaged, bad ethanol carburetor on the inside, I will keep it, and I'll probably do a video on it to show how caustic and nasty it is. It's when it sits in there that it starts to eat away at these, and typically you'll start getting a little bit of. This one's not bad. It's pretty clean. This is a 500 CFM Edelbrock. Um, and this one hasn't been run too bad, so I'm going to assume that it probably ran E10 or straight fuel through it. Yeah, typically it's in the bowls. You can see that where it starts to eat away at it, but E85 is terrible. But you can tune these for E85, but you do need to go way richer on it because you need to put a lot more fuel through it. The problem is you can't bump up the pressure on that as well. The needle and seats in these don't take very much more than 6 psi. That's kind of my tipping point. Anything more than that, you're kind of getting yourself into a little bit of a gray area. Anything more than about 6.5, I've seen the needle and seats can't handle it, even with their off-road series of needle and seats. They just don't have the amount of pressure to handle more of that fuel. So again, I hope that answers a little bit of your questions on the E85 stuff, but the Edelbrock carburetors are not compatible with that. When you buy these carburetors new in a box today, on the fuel inlet here, there is a sticker that they wrap around, a big red thing that sticks off there that says don't run E85 through here or you'll destroy it. I can't remember exactly what it says. I thought I had one around here, but I guess I don't. But you'll see it when you buy the carburetor. Tell you cannot run that. So there are, like I said, there are some folks that do an E85 conversion on these. I've never used it, so I can't really answer if they're good or bad or indifferent, but unless they're doing some coating in there, which they may do. Um, you still have to be very careful with the amount of ethanol that goes through there. So E10, it's kind of marginal if you take good care of it. The biggest thing is if you keep the garbage going through it, keep the crap going through it, and keep changing your fuel filters, upgrade the fuel lines to that PTFE line, you'll probably be okay. Upgrade the accelerator pump, like I said, to a PTFE rated rubber. You'll probably be okay with it. But PTFEs, or excuse me, alcohol ethanol is not just bad on the metal; it's bad on the rubber itself too. So gaskets, anything that comes in contact with it, you're going to have issues with it. So including the little, that's what that is, the little gasket that goes on the fuel inlet there. All that gets destroyed by ethanol fairly quickly. So I hope that answered your question. Let me look at the comments and see if there's anything else on that. Yep. Yeah, like I said, stuck in my garage. It's never done at the refiner. The refiner makes the fuel. It goes to distributors. Distributors will have fuel distribution points around the country, and then they get trucked from to the gas stations, a couple of times a week, whatever, to top off their fuel. And it's always added in at the distributor point, not at the refiner. It's because it's just so caustic, and doing it just adds a lot of cost to it. I imagine at some point in time, fuel. Hey, I don't think ethanol is going away at any point anytime soon, but if it does stick around in the capacity that's in, whether it's E10, E15, which is typically a winter mix of fuel, or if they go into higher to E30, E35, which I know they've talked about doing for that, just to reduce the fossil fuel that's in there, then maybe the refiner will start to upgrade their equipment. But millions upon millions of dollars worth of offset or equipment to handle that. I don't think I have any special thing that protects a carburetor from the ethanol. It just helps keep the garbage and the water and everything else moving through the system. I'm a big fan of the carb defender and the storage defender. That's the other side of it. Is if you're using any ethanol based fuel in these carburetors in the wintertime, drain the carburetor. You're still going to have fuel in the tank. That's almost a given, but that storage defender from Driven is a really, really nice piece to help stabilize the fuel in the system. And if it's only going to be down for 60 days, I would probably put the storage defender in the tank, run it through, and then drain the carburetor and get the ethanol out of it at least. But the Driven carb defender on a normal basis, I use that quite frequently on the Edelbrock carburetors, and I tell folks to use that anytime they're running at E10 because, like I said, the garbage is the most troublesome part of that. It just attracts crap, water especially. Alcohol attracts water, so the more water that gets into the system, the worse it is. The carb defender helps keep push it through the system. So I'm a big fan of that. But if you've watched the oil video, I'm just a big fan of the Driven stuff. I've known Lake Speed for quite a few years. He's a super guy. He's the Energizer Bunny. That guy never stops. But if you've ever gone to any of his AERA tech seminars or seen him talk at PRI in Las Vegas, which again is the cooler of the two trade shows. You got SEMA and you've got PRI. PRI is easily the cooler of the two. For me anyway, because it's more of the hardcore race stuff and the geeky performance stuff. But SEMA gets all the mix because of the cool cars and trucks there, and no doubt about it, I love doing them. But with SEMA canceled this year, obviously it's gone. But PRI is still hopefully gonna happen. It's usually the um, second week of December, so it's late in the year. But anyway, I've known Lake for quite a few years. I worked with him for a very brief amount of time before he went to Total Seal. He's a very, very smart guy. and his methodology in fuel additives, in oil additives, and the way he goes about things just made me a pretty big fan of his. So, again, the oil video speaks for itself, but I don't think I did a carb defender video. I may do one of those down the road, but anyway. Um, yeah, your other question, Tool Junkie, I'm going to get to that one right now. I had a couple of folks ask that question of what causes that bog, and there's a lot of things. It's engine configuration. So if you've got a little bit rowdy camshaft in the thing, that'll always help cause it. Low vacuum, which is typically camshaft related, will typically get you into those issues. The cause isn't the biggest concern. It's how to cure it is what I want to talk about. Um, again, it's all those things, but before we can talk about any of the tuning side of on a carburetor, again, I hate to keep going back to it, but I'm going to keep hammering on. If you do not have the fuel system right, none of these things are going to make any difference. Because if you don't have a pressure regulator, or you got bad filters, or you don't have the right size filters where they need to be in the system, none of this stuff makes any difference. So make sure you have that. Timing is the other side of it too. You have to have your ignition timing dialed in. You have to be spot on with it. And once all that is done, then the tuning side we can talk to about. So what happens when you try to cure bog in a carburetor? And it doesn't really matter whether you're talking about an Edelbrock or a Holly or whatever. But we'll talk specifically more about the Edelbrock stuff because that's what we're talking about here today. How do you get rid of it? Well, bog is caused by a couple of things. It can be either too lean or too rich. Now, everybody always assumes that, oh, I got a bog, I need to throw more fuel out of it. It's not always the case. If you have the carburetor size right and adjusted close to where it needs to be, there's some things you can do to get rid of it. Step up springs is always a popular one. Now, these are the orange and silver springs out of, I think the orange springs came out of the 500 that I took apart here this morning. But those springs are the best way to start to do the tuning process with it. Now, before you look at step up springs, before you look at rods and jets, before you go back to the tuning chart on how to tune that out, there's a really, really easy way you can do it that doesn't cost you anything, and that's the adjustment on the accelerator pump. If you've got an AFR gauge, again, I'll keep preaching that a little bit because it's where I've gone with this um, since about maybe 20 years ago when AFR gauges got a little cheaper and easier to use with a wideband O2 sensor. Back in the old school days, and I say old school, I'm 50 years old, so I guess I kind of came from that time frame when we tuned a lot with a vacuum gauge, but folks would hook a vacuum gauge up to the manifold vacuum gauge port side of the carburetor and tuned that way. Where you tune for fuel economy, you tune for the highest amount of vacuum. If you're tuning for performance, well, you monitor it to see where you're at in that. The higher your vacuum is, well, I can give it a little bit more fuel, a little bit more timing. It's going to drive the vacuum down, but my performance is going to go up. And that's pretty universal for when you're talking about when you're talking about the carburetors and the setup of it. But the fuel pump or the accelerator pump is probably the easiest, cheapest way because you don't have to spend any money on it. All you got to do is change the position on it. Now the top hole here, the one closest to the pivot point here, the fulcrum point there, if you move, I have a rod in it. What I do here, like this one's in the middle, the middle. I don't know if you can see that. This one's in the middle position. If you move the accelerator pump to the top side and go out and drive it in that very low RPM, off idle, under 2,000 RPM is really what we're talking here when we're talking about that really initial shot bog that you get. If you can move the accelerator pump to that top one and it gets better, then you have a fuel issue that you're running too lean. That's without an AFR. If that's typically if you're already in that middle slot, or if you're in the smallest shot, which is the one at the furthest point out here. Um, if you put it in this top slot and you go out and drive it, and you get a little bit better response to it, again, it's because you need a little bit more fuel. So it'll typically tell you if you're running into a lean spot. Now, step up springs is a great place to start with. That after that, you can go ahead and leave the accelerator pump in that top spot, and then adjust the springs. But that's also knowing too what your vacuum is, and so you will need a vacuum gauge to do that part of it. But that's typically where I'll start, and then I will typically refer back to the calibration chart, which I talked about in the Ultimate Tuning Guide, which if you haven't seen that video, it's a really, really good one to explain all the tuning process side of it. But typically the power mode is where you want to look at that. Cruise mode, you can kind of look at it as well, but it really just depends on what you're driving and how you're driving. And if it's just, cruising, you're not, looking for wide open throttle performance, then, you know, um, you don't have to be near as you can sacrifice a little bit from the power mode side of things if you're working more of the cruise side of things. So, again, the calibration chart, that shaded in area here in the middle is really your best points for making these adjustments. Now, this is for the 1905, 1906, so it's the AVS2 650 carburetor. That's what this tuning chart is out of. But you'll make these tuning points into here, base calibration, and then you just make very, very short steps. And then if you print it like this, I'll typically write the tuning that I've done here. You're always going to start the base calibration and then go from there, and then just figure out if it's better or worse. Typically, the bog will be cured in that um, in one of those steps, either adjusting um, the idle mixture screws is a good place to start too, because you're talking about the idle circuit, a little bit more fuel, screwing it out half a turn, go drive it, see if it made any difference, whatever. But the fuel pump adjustment, springs, and then getting into the calibration, typically within one of those, you'll start to get a little bit better with it, and you'll start to get rid of that bog. Now, I guess I'm looking at the comments here, but I'm going to show you something here that I've neglected to do a video on, because if you screw this up, you've made permanent changes to the carburetor. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. And hopefully you won't screw anything up here. I'm not going to give you too much on it, because I'm hesitant whether I do a video on this or not. But if I do, it'll be a very long video. Unfortunately, it'll be probably an hour-long video, because this is probably the most time-consuming part of tuning, um, and I don't do it very often, because if you get the fuel system right, if you get the ignition right, almost everything else that you do on this carburetor, with adjustments to squirters, to the step-up springs, to the rod and jet calibration that you get from the calibration kit, almost all of that will cure it. On a very rare instance, and I say rare, I guess it happens a little bit more often than not. Hang on, I'm going to grab a drink here, because I'm going to need one before. And it's Diamond Dew today. I'm not drinking beer, so. Um, but I'll just look at the comments here really quickly before All right. So typically, where you'll run into that little lean spot that you cannot get rid of, almost 100% of the time, it goes to folks that want a little bit more performance out of the carburetor, and they've got typically a little bit rowdy camshaft intake manifold setup. Cylinder head's a little bit bigger. Compression ratio is probably 9.5 to 1 or higher on a street car. Cam specs really doesn't matter, but to give you some idea on like a big block Chevy is a good place to start, I guess. If you are at around a 230, 236 on the intake, 240 on the exhaust, probably a 110 on the LSA. Um, that's typically that area where you get into a lower vacuum um, situation. If you get into that situation where you got that little bit more of a rowdy camshaft, a lot of times the AFR is going to read a little lean between, and I say it's under 2000 RPM. Now we're not talking, tuning for the power mode side of things when we talk about the calibration chart here, excuse me, the cruise side of this. It's just more, tuning on that power side, but it's that under 2000 RPM. One way you can do this, and I'm going to tell you the easiest way, or the way on this side of it that doesn't, um, it's not reversible. This one that I'm going to show you first. So this one's a little bit easier. This happens to be on the passenger side, but it doesn't matter. All of these boosters are the same. This is the annular discharge um, style of booster, big style booster. I don't know if you can see that. Let me get something to point with here. Let's dig into the box here. Find something to point with, because my fat fingers aren't gonna show this very well. So, all right. When we talk about the boosters here, every one of these AVS style or old Carter style, Edelbrock style, Performer style, AVS, AVS2, Thunder Series, um, doesn't matter what it is, they've all got the same configuration on here. And I'm not gonna get too in depth of this because literally yeah, I mean, it could be a 3 hour video to talk about this, but I'm just gonna give you the down and dirty on it because what I'm gonna give you the tip here, you can do without making a permanent modification to this booster, and it will help you out. But again, if you have an AFR gauge and you are lean between that under 2000 RPM range. And when I say lean, I'm talking about probably 14 and a half to 15 and a half. Um, it's a little too lean to start that shot where you start rolling it harder into the throttle and you get a little bit of that bog. Now, once you've tuned all those other things out and you've gotten max, performance out of it, and again, it's going to cure probably 99% of the stuff that's out there. But this little air bleed right here, it goes into what is typically called, I think if you Google search economizer, or economizer is probably what you'll find the most on it. But that little port in there is regulated by the air that's coming through and the fuel. This is the fuel pickup down here that goes in through here that feeds the down leg on the booster. If you restrict that, it will help create more suction on the fuel side. So how do we create a little bit of restriction with this circuit? Well, the easiest way to do that is with jeweler's wire. Now, again, we're going to get into some pretty complicated stuff here, but this side of it is pretty easy, so I don't have any problem doing it. I'm going to cut off a little piece of this. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see it very well because it is a very, very small gauge wire. This back up so it doesn't run away on me. This happens to be, I just grabbed 28 gauge. Now, typically I will use 28, 30, 32, and then I think, what did I grab here? All right, so that's 26. I'm sorry, that's 28 that I have there. 26, 28, and 30. It can go a little bit bigger on that gauge wire, thicker. But what you can do is if you restrict that, what it does is it will start to draw more fuel because less air is being allowed into the system, if that makes sense. So this wire, and again, I apologize because you're not going to be able to see that worth a darn. Trying to hit some light on there so you can see it. If you feed that wire into there, and you got to feed it in there a little ways, that wire will restrict it enough to typically drop your AFR down. Now, this is where it becomes painstakingly long. When I do this type of tuning, I'm going to set aside probably 5 or 6 hours because it is that long a process to do this. But it will help eliminate that lean spot off idle, like I say, under 2000 RPM, by restricting that port a little bit. It will draw more fuel through suction, and you will typically go from that 15 to 1, 14 and a half. And 14 and a half is, is close to 14.7, which is stoichiometric, which means you are burning every bit of fuel and air that goes through the carburetor and into the engine. Stoic is okay, but it's just a base point. It's just a starting point with it. On a performance application, you don't want it at stoic when you're cruising. I want that carburetor under 2000 RPM. If you're looking at this on AFR, I want it at 13 and a half. That is starting to get a little bit into the richer side of the fuel. But if we put that little wire in there, and then I will wrap it around the bolt, and I don't think I have I guess I do. I'll wrap it around the nut here, and then when you tighten it down, it will hold the wire. I don't know if you can see any of that. It will hold that wire into there, cause that restriction that the wire gave, and cause more fuel to be sucked in there. Now this is why it takes a doggone long, because you've got two boosters, you've got two sides, and typically I'll start with the 26, 28, and start working my way up. Now there's not 20 steps to this, but you do have to stop. You have to take the top of the carburetor off, pull the boosters out, do one for each side, and then drop it in, just tighten it down. Oh, that's where the other nuts went, or the other bolts went. And then start from there, and then go drive it, look at AFR, and see where you're at. Again, I'll bet you I've probably done this. And when I say I tune a lot of carburetors, I'm not talking I tune 100 of these a month. I'm probably doing 5 or 10 of these a month for guys here locally. But probably 3 times a year I'll do this. 3 to 5, I guess. So not that many times. Not very often, because typically you'll get rid of all that bog by doing the regular tuning process on this with calibration kit, step-up springs, idle mixture, whatever. If you get to that point where you cannot, and you are right with everything else, and when I mean right, your fuel system's right, your ignition is right, and you've gone through every other step, and you still have that little bit of a lean spot off idle, that little wire trick can help. Now you got to be careful, because once you cut that wire off and that wire is in there, you've added something foreign to the engine. Now you're just restricting that little port, and drawing more fuel through this port that feeds the down leg, or it feeds the booster on the annular here. But again, you're adding something foreign to the engine, so you have to be a little careful about that. I've been very, very hesitant to talk about this because, well, I don't want you destroying your engine. Fortunately, that small a wire, you're probably not going to. It will probably burn it up or beat it up, within the combustion chamber, but there's everything else you have to worry about it getting past. So I've been very hesitant to talk about that, but that one's probably the easiest side of it to richen that up if you've got a little bit of a lean spot. We'll look at the comments here and see if I lost anybody or if I made the problem worse here. Yep. Destroying the finish on the carb, absolutely. That's why when I did the one of the rebuild videos, I talked about not using anything other than well, there's a wire brush. I very rarely use a wire brush. It's got to be pretty nasty for me to get in there with a wire brush. I usually use an old toothbrush, so it's a good comment from you there. Thinking impaired. Driver side header, tool junkie. Yes and no. I did an AFR video on the new AFR gauge that I'm using now, which I don't think I have nearby, and it's a little buried right now. But I'm using the new fast wireless AFR, which I absolutely love that. But they've got configuration for a single O2 or two O2, meaning one in the driver's side and one in the passenger side header. Most of what you're doing here, you are not going to need a dual wideband sensor. They are very expensive. I mean, I don't know what your threshold for pain is on buying AFR gauges, but anything over 500 bucks for me is a little bit of a. I mean, it's a great tuning tool. Don't get me wrong, but it's a little bit up there when it comes to price, and I can use that, pretty much a lot of other places. So, would I recommend it? Sure, if you want to use it, and the tuning side of it doesn't matter what it is. If you're tuning for fuel economy or performance, is that critical for what you're doing? Then absolutely go with it. But is just using a single wideband O2 in the passenger side header, downrange of the collector properly, 12 to 18 inches. Is that the right way to do it? And can you get away fine with it? I have no problem with it. Matter of fact, that O2 sensor or AFR gauge that I bought is a single wideband wireless O2, and I have no problem with that. It's what's going in the Chevelle behind me, and I would love to use the dual O2, but it's not completely necessary. Hopefully that answered your question. I'll read it again, make sure I got. Um, yeah, it's no issue. Um, yeah, I mean you could put that same thread down into the jet, but then what you do is you get a little bit of an issue there of the orifice is so small on this, and I'll have to do the math on it and I've got it somewhere in my computer upstairs, but the diameter of this is so small that by restricting the airflow, it creates more suction on the fuel side, and you'll draw more fuel. Now you could do that in the jets internally, but there's really no way to hold it. This way is kind of simple because you can wrap that wire around the bolt, and it will hold it right in there. I mean, it's not even tight, and that's down in there pretty good. So the answer to that question is, I guess yes, you could use it in the main jets, but I don't know that I would do that because there's really no way to secure it, and that's just kind of an easy way to do it. So, another AEM cheap setup for your passenger side as well. Yeah, you could throw that have two gauges. The nice thing about the fast one, and I'm using my phone here, um, but that app's free to download. I'll leave a link to the description or the link of it down to the App Store or Android if you're a Android guy. But yeah, you can certainly use a dual gauge, like two AFR gauges. Maybe have you know uh, you could put them side by side and have them labeled, or put left side of the steering wheel, the driver's side, right side, passenger side, whatever you want to do. If you want to quickly glance on it on the tuning side, the nice thing about that, the app on the fast setup, is it has it right next to each other. The top side is the passenger side or driver side, and I think the bottom side is passenger. I'd have to look at it, but again, I'm only using the single O2, so I don't really know. I haven't really played with the dual O2 AFR, but yeah, certainly you could do that if you want to run two gauges. I guess the AEM, and that's what I replaced with the fast one. The AEM's decent because you can buy a pretty good O2 with the 7 or the 4.9 LSU rated Bosch O2 sensor for under 200 bucks. I think they're 130, 140 bucks nowadays. So, and I think you can probably get a Chinese knockoff of that 4.9 Bosch O2 sensor fairly cheap these days. So I haven't looked at it, but you could probably buy it for under $100. So, but anyway, hopefully that answered the question there. But let's see what else we got here. Appreciate um, the the support there, Tool Junkie. You just never know sometimes when you do these videos whether or not they're gonna you get to put the right information out. So I do appreciate that. Um, yeah, on the secondary adjustment, that's why I've got the carburetor here. So I will show you that secondary adjustment. Get rid of some of the stuff here. I appreciate you doing getting me off the topic of this, because the other side of that is removing that little that little brass insert. You can remove that. Again, hugely pain in the butt, and then that's where the permanent modification is. And this is a much bigger drill, but um, typically a 55 to a 60. You will drill out the inside of that, and then do the same process. But again, I, I don't even want to talk about that too much, because that process there is, it's taken me a long time to learn it, and trust me, I have ruined more of these boosters than I've probably fixed. But it's just a learning process. But the adjustment on the Thunder Series or the AVS2 on the secondary, this is a very, very fine adjustment, and you're not making big, huge turns on that screw back here. Once you see if I got the right, I do. There's T15 in there. The T15 Torx is the lock for it, and then all the adjustments are made on this side of it. Now, again, what's that? You're just adjusting the secondary side of it for how much or how quick you can get the secondaries to react to the drop in the vacuum on the manifold vacuum on the secondary side. Um, I probably need to do a full video on this, on engine, um, to properly show you how to do this to get it right. But obviously the set screws there, and then the tune. Now I can't remember what Edelbrock says that they want, or they have the base set at. I think it's like a turn and a half. Maybe it's 2 turns. Um, I'd have to look and see, but the adjusting the secondary side on the AVS2 or the older Thunder Series carburetors, again, it's more a little bit of a seat of the pants type deal. On AFR side, you're into the secondaries there, so typically you start to get out of that 2000 RPM and north, so your idle circuit's eliminated. I think your AFR is probably, and I don't didn't look at notes on this to see where typically they're at, but typically your secondaries are going to open. Your AFR is going to start to get down there. 12.5 to 13 is typically your AFR on this. So once you get into the secondaries, you're starting to get into wide open throttle, more load, more demand. You need more fuel, and that's what that adjustment's for, just to tip it in a little bit quicker. But yeah, I should probably do a full video on that, because it's just there's too much detail in it, I guess, and it really doesn't really help to explain it. But get the torque unlocked here, but you got to have the so we are unlocked. And you can see what the tension looks like. I'm losing tension on it. Now it's just going to flop. There's literally no tension on it. That's not a good thing. I think I went way more than 2 turns there. I did. It's almost by feel a little bit. But the AFR, and you can tell a little bit by that, but that's pretty close to where I have it set. Lock it down. But it's just kind of a feel type of thing. But Yeah, I'll do a little bit. I think I'll do probably a separate video on that because I don't think I'm going to answer your question very good. It's almost one that I'd have to do on a running engine, and that way we can look at AFR at the same time. The nice thing about having the wireless, and it's one of the reasons why I got it, is I can put the phones there. Where you're going to see it is once you get in it, get the thing into gear, so you're and then full chain as you hammer that open. But the adjustments here are small. You're making half turns at a time typically. I typically don't turn adjustment on these unless it is just way out, like I'm at 14 half to one, or anywhere over 14. I'll make a full turn adjustment on that to try to richen it up a little bit. So I'll probably I haven't really thought about that. I guess I probably should do a video on that to talk about the secondary adjustment on the Thunder series or the AVS2. So yeah, I apologize there, Tool Junkie. It wasn't really a lot of info, but it's a good question and one that I think I'll probably do a video on down the road. Let me see. Let's see what other questions I had from before. Um, I didn't write a name down, but I think stuck in my garage. This may have been another one of yours as well. About do I still use a vacuum gauge to tune? I talked a little bit about this a minute ago, but the answer to that's yes. I still use a vacuum gauge, but I don't rely on it heavily. If I'm tuning a carburetor and it's more for they're looking beautiful tool and you're reading what's coming out of the exhaust side, um, you cannot beat the what you're getting out of the AFR, or excuse me, out of the vacuum gauge when you're on the manifold port here to tune. So you tune it for the highest amount of vacuum to get the most fuel economy. It's the least amount of fuel that you're consuming at that point. The nice thing about tuning with vacuum gauge and an AFR is the vacuum gauge kind of gets you into the ballpark of where you need to be. When you're talking about fuel economy, because I don't know about you all, but I don't like giving my money to the gas station. I still want to tune for a little bit of economy, but I'm a performance guy. The build on the Chevelle, as we continue to work on that, we're going to see that the big block that I'm building is going to be fairly aggressive. It's going to be about a 700 horse NA motor, not overly complicated to build. Once you get north of that and try to get to 1,000, that's where you're going to spend some money and NA on that big motor. But the vacuum gauge is a great place to start. Now, typically, once I get the vacuum set or get the carburetor just at the highest amount of vacuum, that's when I'll switch over and I'll almost 100% rely on the AFR to give me the full reading of where I'm tuning at. So AFR is where I've gone to, and where most people, I guess, go to when they look at tuning on the fuel side of things. The vacuum gauge is a good place to start, but I don't even have a vacuum gauge in the car anymore. It's the AFR that I look at, as I'm driving around. Vacuum I may, hook up occasionally just to see what the vacuum side is. Now, I don't use, I'm an automatic or not an automatic guy, so I don't use the timed or the vacuum port on the modulator for the automatic transmission. I don't use that, so this one's almost always blocked on all mine. And on all of mine as well, I do not use vacuum advance on the distributor to use the timed port, which is the passenger side here. Um, I lock that out at the distributor and use a spark box. I've switched over to the fast ignition stuff, but their their digital E6 spark box is what controls the timing for the advance. So I'm just started to use their E7 box, which is their kind of like their digital 7 if you're an MSD guy. So there's a little bit more tunability there. So um, but so I can use either one of those ports at either time because they're always blocked off. So when I'm tuning for fuel economy, it's just a matter of pulling the vacuum cap off, hooking a gauge up to it, and I go from there. So Cool. Well, I'm glad I answered your question. Like I said, I always feel like I'm not giving enough information. So, if it got you what you were looking for, then at least put you on the right path to do the tuning and all that. So, I'm just gonna look through here, see if we got any other questions. I think we're kind of caught up on question wise, and I think I pretty much had everything answered from what you guys left in the comments on the video or on the pictures that I left when talking about doing the tuning side of things. I guess one thing critical here, since we're talking about the two ports here, again, if we go back to the camshaft side of things, and you're at an aggressive cam, and again, your fuel system's right, your ignition's right, and you are using a vacuum assisted or a vacuum advanced distributor, a lot of times it's told to put it into the timed port, and that's where I start. If you've got a rowdy camshaft, here's another really good tip. Take it from the time port and go right to the manifold vacuum. That will give you more advance in the distributor initially. Your full advance is going to come in, past that 2000 RPM, but the manifold vacuum will give you more advance, and the timed vacuum is more of the. Somebody asked me about California standards on stuff in the questions or the videos or the images I left, and I don't deal with carb at all. There's a reason why I don't live on the West Coast anymore, and that's one of them. I don't have to deal with the standards, and I feel sorry for you all that are stuck there. But that timed port is also the EPA port or the economy port or whatever. So always start there. But if you've got a little bit rowdier camshaft and you want to still continue to use a vacuum advance on the distributor, go ahead and go right to the manifold port. It's a good tip that I don't think I've ever talked about yet, but again, I may do another video on that as well sometime about talking about those two ports, because for whatever reason they get a little confused. But always start on the timed side of things, and then you always move to the manifold vacuum. So yeah, this one just has a slight little ridge in. It was a good question that you had there, Tool Junkie, because I think that was yours, or maybe it was Stuck in My Garage had that question about. You did. It was Stuck in My Garage that had the question about can it alter or change between the two sides, and absolutely yes. But can think of a paper filter. Yeah. So again, the reason why I use. Hopefully you guys can see that. Probably can't see the. Well, maybe you can. But again, stainless between the tank and the pump. If you're using that traditional style, whether you're engine mounted pump or you're using a frame mounted pump, um, electric pump, stainless here, and then paper on this side. And the reason why paper is good here is you typically need a little bit more PSI out of the regulator to push past a stainless fuel filter. Paper, it goes through paper much easier, even on a 10 micron. If you're a 10 micron stainless, you're going to need a little bit more PSI out of the regulator because it will kill it. It kills a little bit of the pressure. So, the paper side right before the carburetor is what I tend to use because it helps the drop in the pressure. So anyway, hopefully that answered that question. But I'm trying a live stream setup here too. So I'm using the phone and I don't have it plugged into anything because I'm using an actual microphone because audio sucks on the iPhone and I didn't want the audio to be horrible. So hopefully my phone isn't about to die. Had it charged up, but what else you got? Well, we're talking carburetor tech. Again, just that little deal on the timed and the manifold port. Always start with the timed when you're doing a distributor, but you may need to move to the manifold if you don't have an automatic. If you do have an automatic, you can go line out T. T goes to the transmission because you want the manifold vacuum for the transmission, and the other T will go to back to the distributor, or the front to the distributor if you're a Ford or a Mopar guy. I don't have any complaints about working on a Windsor motor or a a big 440 Mopar. They're still fun. It's all fuel air spark to me. It's all performance, so it doesn't really matter. So, what else should we talk about since we got everything here? I think we pretty much, like again, we pretty much covered all the questions from before. So I hope I answered all that. I do think I'm gonna do a tuning video. I do need to do a live tuning video. Somebody made mention of that, of doing a live, because we are still talking pretty much a little bit theory here, and I think I want to do a live video, and I think I want to do that on the Chevelle when I get the big block done. So hopefully that won't be too much longer down the road. Unfortunately, I think I've made the decision to rewire the entire car. So that's always fun. Mechanically, I know this stuff inside and out, no problem at all. When you start talking about wiring, I would rather hit myself in the head with a hammer for about an hour than do any wiring. I absolutely hate it. Some people find great ease in doing that. It's me, I don't. So let's see what else we got here. Yeah, appreciate that. Thinking impaired, the live tuning video will be a good one because you can see live results of, making the rod and jet changes, and I will use an AFR with that, and we will follow how it affects AFR, because that's essentially what we're tuning. AFR is the premier, way of tuning, I guess, for a carburetor. We won't talk about EFI tuning. I do a lot of that as well, and I still tune in AFR, but Lambda is the preferred way of doing it. Most Lambda value always changes. Where when you're tuning in AFR, if you're tuning EFI, or excuse me, you're tuning leaded, or not leaded, but regular non-leaded, C16 fuel or pump 93 octane, whatever, then your AFR value changes. If you're going to tune in E85, the number drops down. It's just simply because of the way things go. When you're tuning in Lambda, it's 1.0. It's always, the perfect measurement for. So I think we got everything. We're over an hour here, so I don't want to draw things out too much, and I don't want to bore anybody to death. But I gave you a lot of tips here, I think, on the tuning side of things. At least I hope I did. Again, I am not talking about this anytime soon. I just don't want to frustrate anybody and watch you ruin boosters, because I've done this enough times where I've learned to go slow and take small steps, just kind of like on the when we talk about the tuning chart side of things. You take small little steps, but when you are tuning this side of things where you're making permanent changes to a booster, I guarantee you, just go ahead and go buy 5 or 6 of these, because you will ruin them. I've done it more times than not. So anyway, um, air leaks at the throttle shaft area. Not really on a Holly. You'll get more of them. It seems like the Edelbrock has been. It's not that the Edelbrock's a better carburetor than the Holly. They're all situational, but don't really get a lot of leaks here. If you feel like you've got a leak at the throttle shaft on either side, a little shot of carb cleaner. Idle. It doesn't need to be under a lot of load, any load at all. You just idle in park, shoot some carburetor cleaner there. If you see the RPM spike up, as long as these are all plugged, and your PCV's usable, and you're plugged on the power booster side for the. We're not even going to talk about power boosters. I hate power booster brakes. I wish people would stop using them. They're horrible. Go to Hydro Boost. You'll thank yourself. But as long as these are all secure, not a lot, not several hundred RPM, but you'll get 100 RPM probably out of it, depending on how bad it is. So a little bit of carburetor cleaner on those right there will help determine if you've got a leak there. If you do, there's nothing you can do about it. These ends, but I've never used it. I just pitch the carburetor. They're not that much money. Anyway, again, like I said, we're over an hour, and I didn't want to drag this on too much and babble along here. But hopefully, I gave you some cool tips that on all that stuff on ethanol tuning and curing a little bit of the bog, and can't remember everything else we talked about, but I'm just going to avoid this. We're not going to talk about that. Just pretend like you didn't see it. Pretend like I didn't even talk about it. I guess it's not that bad. Like I said, the wires is not anything you can really screw up, and if you're tuning with an AFR gauge, that's where you'll notice the tune on that. But yeah, we shouldn't talk about that. So because if I do, I'll start talking about how to pull that that little brass bush. I guess there's one little tip here. Gonna move some stuff out of here to get in this toolbox. But one little thing here, and I've seen this enough. This brass, this one's in here, and that's what just caught my eye. Occasionally, you will run into a situation where you cannot chase down the lean. I've seen these, and it's very rare. I bet you I've seen it probably less than probably 5 times in, almost 25 years of tuning this carburetor, where this wasn't seated right at the factory. Take a punch, a little bit bigger than this one, but a flat punch, not anything with a tip on it, and drive that down to seat it. Now this one's in here a little cockeyed. Let's see if this one is. Yeah, this one's worse, but it is sealed. Seal it with a punch just to make sure that it's sealed. You can cause an air leak there. And you definitely don't want that because you will be chasing that one forever. You'll throw that carburetor away before you'll find that. I've gotten to that point as well, where I start to monkey with that and I realize that there's an issue there. Some people tell you to throw some paint on there. I guess that's probably okay, but you know, something that would seal up a little bit better. But if that brass plug is not sealed right, you'll chase that one for a while. So you might just want to you can make a little tap on that. Matter of fact, I would probably tap that one. And that's that annular discharge one. That's kind of interesting. I never noticed that about that one. I keep this one out of a carburetor just to use it to show people what the difference between a down leg and a an annular discharge is. But I never really noticed that to keep any air into leak yet. So there would. Anyway, I think that would pretty much cover it, I guess, for today. If there's any other questions on there, like I said, I'll try to keep. I do try to keep track of it pretty good. So if you got any questions post video, just leave them down below, and hopefully you got something out of it. If you did, give me a thumbs up. I always appreciate that. And got any other comments or questions on tuning, leave them below, and hopefully we can get to them, and hopefully we answered some of your questions. Again, that ultimate tuning guide's a really, really good video to watch. And again, I'm not gonna stop talking about this. You've got to get the fuel system right, and quite honestly, the ignition's just the same. So if you don't have those two right, it doesn't matter anything you do tuning wise, you are not going to get it right if you are fighting a problem that's going to make whatever is going on here worse. So anyway, hope you guys got something cool out of it, and I guess we'll catch you guys on the next one. I definitely appreciate you guys watching, and stay safe out there, and we will see you guys. I'm trying to think what the next video will be. I've been cutting up the tray and welding the cross member, and I got it finally sorted out for the Chevelle, so I may do that one next. But again, I may do the tuning video on the AVS because I think that's a good video. So, but anyway, we'll catch you guys later. I appreciate you guys watching. We will catch you next time.